Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. Before we jump into things, I did want to remind those of you who listen to audio only through a podcast platform that I do have video of my recordings available on YouTube. If you click my link tree in the show notes, you'll see a tab for my YouTube channel. I'd love for you to check out the video version and subscribe. I appreciate all the support as my show continues to grow. This week's story takes us back to Utah. For those of you who are new to the podcast, my family and I have lived just north of Salt Lake City for the past 4 years. It's a very dry climate, and Smokey the Bear's fire danger signs are on high or very high all summer long. Dead grass and trees, paired with Utahns' love for pyrotechnics, has started fires in the past, forcing people out of their homes. July is Firework Month. Between Independence Day and the state holiday, Pioneer Day, it's not unusual to hear them being set off randomly throughout the month. They have restrictions on where you can do aerials to avoid the dry mountainside catching fire, but accidents still happen. It's more than just fireworks. Camping is really popular, but people don't always properly put out their campfires. On more than one occasion, we've stumbled upon a smoldering fire while on a hike. So frustrating. Utah is prone to earthquakes and are always talking about the big one that everyone just knows is coming. I've experienced one earthquake since living here, and it was pretty scary. Not only that, but we are relatively close to Yellowstone National Park, home of the largest volcanic system in North America. When I say relatively close, it's about a 4-hour drive, but close enough that if a volcano blows, we'll be affected. You'd be surprised how far volcanic ash in the air will spread. We have a lot of smoke in the summers coming in from the wildfires in California and other surrounding states. It's no surprise that Utahns are pretty into prepping, having a plan in the event of a natural disaster or apocalypse. Just about every house has space designated for food storage. Many people grow and can their own food. It's one thing to store food and have an evacuation plan, but some people take prepping to the extreme. If you've seen Doomsday Preppers on National Geographic Channel, then you know what I'm talking about. This week's story is about a family whose paranoia of an impending apocalypse ended in tragedy. Benjamin and Kristi Strack lived in Springville, Utah, about 50 miles south of Salt Lake City. They had 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl. Jansen, Benson, Emery, and Zion. I wasn't able to verify this information anywhere, but Jansen's last name was McGee, which makes me think he wasn't Ben's biological son. Although it's possible he was born before the two married and they gave him Kristi's maiden name. Larger families are pretty common in these parts. Take Ben Strack, for example. He had 11 brothers and sisters. I don't even have 11 cousins. 4 years prior to the incident, Ben cut ties with his family. I can only make assumptions as to why. They seem to have very different and extreme social views. Both of them had a history of drug abuse, and perhaps that caused some bad blood over the years. Despite this, his siblings only had kind things to say about Ben and Kristi. They referred to them as loving parents. I don't doubt they loved their children, but they definitely had their struggles. Kristi recently kicked a heroin addiction and was taking methadone. Methadone is a prescription drug that'll make you feel good, but yet it blocks the high you would get from heroin. It can also help ease withdrawal symptoms. It's not a cure, and it's only meant to be used while weaning you off of your addiction, but some patients end up using it for years. So, replacing drugs with drugs, the American way. During her detox and recovery, Ben would stay home from work for long periods of time to help her. His employer was sympathetic and understanding. There's something strange that stood out to me about these two in my research. They became close friends with convicted murderer Dan Lafferty. The case involving Dan and his brother Ron is one of Utah's most notorious. I read 2 different versions of events that led to Kristi meeting Dan. One source said that Kristi was friends with Dan Lafferty's daughter and went along with her to visitation. Kristi enjoyed his company, and eventually she would go alone to visit Dan. The other source said Kristi was reading the book about the Lafferty brothers' crimes titled Under the Banner of Heaven. She had a dream about Dan and decided to reach out to him. Kristi and Ben would regularly visit him in prison to chat. Either way, the relationship is really weird. Dan Lafferty and his brother Ron murdered their sister-in-law and her 18-month-old daughter in 1984. There's currently a TV series in production about this case, and perhaps I'll do an entire episode on it at some point, so I'll keep this brief. Dan and his brother Ron were members of the LDS Church. Ron was a self-proclaimed prophet of God and had his own very strong religious views. This led to him being excommunicated from the church and divorced by his wife. In a revelation from God, Ron was ordered to kill Brenda, the wife of his other brother, Alan, as well as his toddler niece. He roped in his brother Dan to help him. Ron used the cord of a vacuum cleaner to strangle Brenda and slit her throat. Then Dan did the same to their niece. Ron has since died of natural causes, and Dan is currently serving his life sentence at Utah State Prison. I can't imagine reading a book on the subject and feeling the need to meet him and chat like old friends. Dan is clearly off his rocker, and it's not looking good for Kristi or Ben either. I'm giving you both versions of what I read because people love to call me out when I'm wrong. The truth is, I wasn't there. I can only report on what I dig up in my research. Having said that, I also had conflicting ages of his niece that he killed. I read both 15 months and 18 months. The point is, she was a toddler and was murdered in cold blood. Back to this weird love triangle. Apparently through the years, Dan and Kristi fell in love, and Ben was okay with it. Dan racked up phone bills on collect calls to Kristi from prison, some of which became X-rated. Dan's hair was really long, and Kristi was always asking him to cut it. Well, he did cut it, and then he mailed it to her house as a keepsake. He wanted the couple to deal with his will and funeral arrangements when he dies. It's all so strange. I don't know exactly what they spoke about during their visits. It's possible Dan was fueling their mental distress and causing them to think irrationally. In 2008, Ben and Kristi were charged with forgery and drug possession. This arrest meant they were no longer allowed as visitors in the prison. They continued communication by writing letters back and forth. Now that Ron was dead, Dan was the one claiming to be the prophet, Elijah. I'm sure Dan flung a lot of crap at these two, and for the most part, Kristi ate it right up. But she wasn't able to accept his claim of prophecy. He would go on, and she eventually just stopped responding to his letters. The last time they were in contact was 2008. Leading up to the incident, friends and family of the Stracks said that they were highly concerned about an apocalypse. They wanted to be more prepared and live off-grid, have their own food source, and be able to survive on their own. They shared plans about moving to the Montana wilderness. They also threw around the phrase, leaving this world. Everyone assumed they meant civilization, leaving their home in the suburbs to live off-grid. It's easy to say this in hindsight, but their words should have been taken more literally. To quote, escape the evil in this world, moving off-grid wasn't enough. They intended to end their lives. Not just the two of them, it was going to be a family event. Their eldest son, 18-year-old Jansen, was engaged to be married. He still lived at home, but he was rarely there. He kept busy spending time with friends and his fiancée. 14-year-old Benson was definitely aware of the plan. He wrote a letter to his best friend. In the letter, you could tell something wasn't right. He hinted that someday they might find him dead and listed items that he wanted his friend to have. He folded up the letter and stashed it in his bedroom. Was he brainwashed by Ben and Kristi and believed he needed to die to be saved? Or did he know their plan and accept it as his fate? Emery was 12 years old and Zion just 11. September 27, 2014. Jansen was gone most of the day and returned back to his family home after spending time with his fiancée. Typically, when he enters the house, one of his 5 other family members would be in the living room to greet him. But it was quiet. It didn't seem like anyone was home. He called out for his family, but there was no response. He noticed the master bedroom door was shut, which was unusual. He reached for the doorknob, and it was locked. Jansen knew something seemed off, and he called his grandma. She came over to the house and forced herself into the bedroom. What they saw left them both speechless. Kristi, Benson, Emery, and Zion were in the master bed underneath the covers. Ben's body was draped across the bed, lying on top of his family. Ben and Kristi had executed a mass suicide. They convinced their own innocent little children to drink the Kool-Aid. There was a small bucket, like what you would use to make sandcastles with. It was filled with an orange, syrupy liquid. There were empty cups sitting around the room. The liquid was made up of cold and flu medicine, generic Benadryl, and cherry-flavored liquid methadone. Toxic amounts of diphenhydramine, which is an antihistamine, and methadone was the cause of death for Benson, Emery, and Zion. Apparently, Kristi didn't think that was going to cut it for her high tolerance levels. She added extra doses of dextrorphan and doxylamine to her cocktail. Ben, who was the last to die according to their final resting places, he went out by a heroin overdose. Jansen said he was oblivious to the idea that his family was planning this. He assumes that because he was engaged to be married, they didn't include him. Earlier, I called this a mass suicide, but it's actually murder, at least for the children. They're minors. They doubtfully would have made this decision to kill themselves without guidance from their parents. Emery and Zion's deaths actually were categorized as murder. Benson's was listed as undetermined. At 14, investigators thought he was old enough to make that decision. Plus, he wrote what was essentially a goodbye letter to his friend. Ben and Kristi did not leave a note. No goodbyes, no explanation. All family and investigators had to go by was their behavior in the weeks leading up to their deaths. Looking back, friends and family said that they were acting strange. Ben and Kristi were always perceived as unconventional. They homeschooled their kids, and the idea of wanting to live off-grid wasn't surprising. But as an outsider, are you able to tell when things cross the line from being unconventional into mental illness? Neither of them ever saw a doctor for a mental crisis or psychotherapy treatment. They were never formally diagnosed with anything. They aren't here for us to pick their brain and figure out the exact reasoning for this murder-suicide. Proper diagnosis or not, Ben and Kristi were experiencing paranoia so strong that they truly believed it was better to end their lives and the lives of their children. The feeling of impending doom was too much to bear. One thing that's still a mystery, it's unknown if the children drank from the pail or if the concoction was forced upon them. There was no sign of a struggle. When Dan Lafferty found out about the Strack family's deaths, he was saddened. He said, quote, "I'll miss them, but I'm happy for them. I believe they're in paradise now." End quote. He admitted that their conversations they had over the years could have contributed to their decision. As we know, Dan claimed to be the prophet Elijah. He referred to the world we live in as hell and controlled by the devil himself. Ben and Kristi spoke openly to their friends about the evil in this world. I have no doubt that the years of meeting and chatting with this psycho had them brainwashed. There wasn't any evidence left behind to show what they thought was going to happen, a natural disaster, a terrorist attack. They believed something truly evil was coming and didn't want to be around when it happened. This story makes me so sad. The poor kids were murdered by the 2 people who were supposed to keep them safe. But in the twisted minds of Ben and Kristi, that's exactly what they were doing, protecting them from evil. I tried to find information on the eldest son, Jansen McGee, but as you can imagine, he tries to stay out of the spotlight. I hope he is managing the grief of losing his entire family and is able to live a happy and fulfilling life. When people find out I have a true crime podcast, they love to throw story suggestions my way. I was at a Botox party a few months back when a party goer had a long list of Utah cases I made note of. The Strack family was one of them. If you're enjoying killer stories, please share it with your true crime loving friends. It's the best way to support the show. You can visit buymeacoffee.com/killerstories to make a one-time donation. Please continue sending those story suggestions to killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Killer Stories Podcast and at Killer Stories PC on Twitter. Again, head on over to my YouTube channel and check it out. Subscribe, click the notification bell, like, comment. It helps more than you know. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this has been a killer's story.